What's going on, boys and girls? Welcome back to FEEKI Flips, the most dumbed down real estate channel on all of YouTube, because if I can make money doing this, then so can you. We're back today with another question of the week episode, and today we'll be talking about how I talk to sellers on the phone, and we'll also go through kind of my lead qualification process, since that relates a lot to talking to the sellers. With how hot the market is basically nationwide, really the only way to consistently find deals that work for wholesaling or flipping or even buying rentals at a discount is to go off market. And when you do your own marketing and you produce these off market leads to buy houses, you're gonna have to talk to the sellers direct because there's no agents involved to talk back and forth representing both sides. So talking to sellers is super important. That's the only way that you're gonna get deals. So let's hop right into it. A couple of points to cover before we get into actually talking to sellers is one, first and foremost, this is a sales job. I know all the gurus online, when they teach you about wholesaling, they push that this is a marketing business and not a real estate business and all that stuff. And the marketing aspect is super important here, because you can't get any leads without doing any marketing, or any marketing that works at least, because what good are leads if you can't convert them from leads to contracts? That's the selling part right there. That being said, you don't have to be a master salesman to do this. I'm certainly not. I don't even consider myself a good salesperson. We still get deals. We still get it done. Someone who's really skilled in sales could definitely get more contracts than I can. Just keep that in mind that yes, this is a sales job. Yes, you have to sell to people, but you also don't have to be like a stereotypical greasy car salesman to buy houses off market. Point number two is ethics and reputation. Now, dealing with real estate, and especially if you're a licensee like me, we are held to a little bit higher standard than just a regular civilian or a personal investor that's not a real estate agent. But either way, one of the core values we have at the company here is always do what's right for the seller. We never want to misrepresent to the seller in any way about the value of their home or anything like that. We want to be straight up with people. I'm always acting with my personal reputation and the company's reputation in mind whenever I'm talking to sellers. So it's okay to explain to them exactly like where we're coming from, why the offer is where it is, but I would never say to a seller, oh, your house is a piece of shit, like it's only worth this much and that's what we're gonna pay. Just greasy techniques like that. It's not worth it in the long run. It might get you a deal or two up front, but we're in this for the long game, and we always want to keep those things in mind, is just be ethical, be a decent person, and that'll get you much farther along in this game long term. Point number three, this is especially important for new people. It's okay to not know. When you're on the phone with sellers, until you really know what you're talking about, and even sometimes at this point, I'm 3.5 years in, I don't know sometimes if they have a question. It's okay to just say, you know what, I don't know, let me check with my partner, or I'll have to check on that for you. It's okay to not know exactly what you're talking about, especially at the beginning. You'll find once you make 1,000 of these calls, they all go pretty much the same way, and people are always asking the same, 5 or 10 questions maybe. So with experience, you'll have answers to almost everything that they ask. But at the beginning, I was always scared to get on the phone. Still with cold calling, it's really hard for me to pick up the phone when I have to do it. People are generally pretty nice, and they don't know if you work for some huge corporation or if you're just a private investor or anything like that. You're just a voice on the phone. So if they ask you a question and you don't know, don't be embarrassed to just say, you know what, let me check on that for you and I'll get right back. Here at the company, we have a 3-step process that involves talking to sellers. First step is our initial call, and this is our first point of contact with the seller, whether they're calling us or we're calling them. And this call is just used to pre-qualify the lead, and that's it. Call number 2 is when we give them a call back after we do some research, and we're gonna make them a range offer and set the appointment to go look at the house. And our third step is the actual appointment. So we'll run through those 3 steps and then 2 additional steps at the end that all involve talking to sellers. So first off is that first call, and like I said, this is just to pre-qualify the lead. All we're looking to do on this call is start to build rapport with the seller. We're gonna get as much information as possible from them about the property and their motivation. And that's basically it. We're just gathering as much information as we can, and we're being nice to the seller at the same time and trying to start to cultivate that relationship that's important down the road. So some of the things that I look for on that first call, obviously condition of the home. Some people don't want to tell you anything. They just say, well, make me an offer. You called me, come look at it, that type of thing. I guess if you're new, you could take any appointment that you can possibly take because it's good experience to get in front of the seller. But usually when you have quite a few leads coming in, we're going to try to get as much information about the property as possible. So we're going to want to prompt these people. I always pull up the property information that you can find on the assessor's website first, so I know what I'm looking at, and say, hey, I'm calling about the property here. And then just to start that conversation, I say, well, I can see all the basic information about it online. It's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,400 square feet, 2-car garage. Does that all sound right? Yes. And I think that shows some confidence in the seller too, that you're not just like some random person that doesn't know what they're talking about. You're taking it seriously. You pulled up the property before you called them back, etc. So I'll just confirm that with them. And sometimes the counter record is wrong. They have the opportunity to tell you so right there. After they say, yes, that's all right, and say, okay, what can you tell me about condition? And then just let them talk. And 99 times out of 100, they're going to say, well, it could use some new flooring and just needs to be painted, and that's about it. It's always just paint and carpet, and it's never just paint and carpet in reality. You just have to kind of probe. If that's what they say, I'd say, okay, cool. So is the kitchen all original? When's the last time the kitchen was remodeled? When's the last time the bathrooms were remodeled? And just start picking apart the house a little bit and just trying to get a better overall picture of what the house looks like on the inside. After we go through all of that, I'll ask them about the major systems of the house: roof, plumbing, electrical, HVAC, foundation, any known issues with any of that stuff. Almost always they say no, and almost always it needs a roof. So you can, again, ask, when's the last time it had a roof on it? And just get a great overall picture of the condition of the home. And on this first call, it's important to take great notes, no matter what the seller's talking about, because we can use those later on. So a couple minutes into the call, when you can kind of get the seller talking more, especially if they're pretty tight-lipped at the beginning, you can get them talking about the house, and then you can start going into what their motivation is to sell. There's a bunch of different ways to do this, and I try to just let the conversation flow as it does. I don't really use a call script at the beginning. I did use a script, but once you have what you need to know on the call memorized, the calls all have the same information, but they can go a million different ways. Really, I'm just gathering information about the property, and then it's like, why are you selling, without saying, why are you selling? Sometimes you have to say that, but other times it's like, okay, so are you guys moving out of state? What's going on? And then, oh yeah, I'm moving back to Texas, or I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And then you can really kind of figure out what their motivation is. And sometimes you have to ask them 2 or 3 times in different ways on why they're really motivated to sell the house. And sometimes they're not motivated to sell the house, and that's good information too. This is all stuff that we need to know, and that's what we're using this first call for. Motivation is super important, kind of their goals with the sale, as far as if they need the cash, if they need the cash to pay off other debt that they have, if this is one of many properties, maybe it doesn't work out on this one, but you can ask them about a different property that they own, all that type of stuff. So not to get too far into the weeds or different strategies, motivation is one of the most important parts of the call that you can get that information on this first call. Other than condition and motivation, we're also looking for timelines for the sale. We'll always try to get a price out of them too. And timelines are pretty straightforward. Usually when people are calling you, they're like, yeah, I'm ready whenever. Sometimes it's like, oh, I'll be ready in 6 months. Also good information to have no matter what their answer is. Price, people can be a little bit tight-lipped about. Sometimes they won't give you a price. Oh, I'm just calling around to see what it's worth. Depending on how the market is in your area, looking back when the market wasn't as crazy as it is now, I would just play a little bit harder on the phone with sellers, and I would tell them, okay, well, you think about it and call me back when you have a price in mind. Like, I would not go any farther until they tell me the price. That's one of the main points we need to get for pre-qualifying this lead, if it's a potential deal or not. Usually people have a price in mind, and this is another question that you might have to ask 2 or 3 different ways. You must have thought about it. Usually they're going to say, oh, Zillow says it's worth this, neighbor's house sold for that, yada, yada, yada. I always say, have you thought about how much you want for it? You can go a little bit deeper. Thought about how much you want for it, and as is condition, if we come in and pay all cash. These are all fine things to say. Just kind of depends on the person and where the call is going. So once we have condition, motivation, timelines, and price, that's basically all the information we need to get going and seeing if it's a potential deal or not once we get off the phone with them. Depends on how experienced you are. If you're brand new, you don't know what a deal looks like, if the person just said some crazy price that would be a home run deal, you still wouldn't really know. So it's fine to just say, okay, let me do some digging and I'll give you a call back, and then you go into that second call. With a little bit more experience, you might be able to determine right away, it's like, oh, this sounds like a deal, and just set the appointment right there. It's very important to set the appointment if you are wholesaling or flipping in a market that's in your backyard or within an hour where you can drive to the property. Obviously, if you're virtually wholesaling, you're not going to be setting any appointments. You're just going to be trying to get contracts. But from experience, we've learned that it's much easier to get contracts when you're face-to-face with the seller. So set the appointment when you can. If they're super motivated and it sounds like it's going to be a deal, set it on the first call and get out there as soon as you can. You're always competing with other buyers too. If not, just say, okay, thanks. Let me do some digging on my end and I'll get back to you in a couple minutes with an offer. One other thing I will add about building rapport, sometimes, obviously, those are the main goals for this first call, is to pre-qualify the lead and get information. But pretty often, you're just talking about whatever the seller wants to talk about, especially if they're not super kind of mean on the phone. Especially when you start talking about motivation, it's always some weird situations going on. They're moving out of state, health issues, something like that. So I would dig a little bit farther on those and just try to build some rapport with them about the situation. Just try to relate to them a little bit. If they have some medical issues going on, someone in your family does, you bring that up. You guys start talking about that. These are all good things because, one, you're building a deeper relationship with the seller than just like, give me the information and I'll call you back. And also later on, if we need to follow up with them, we have notes on all of this stuff. So you can reference your notes later that says like, husband has cancer or what have you. And then you can check in with them 6 months down the road. They don't really know. People that aren't in sales don't realize that the salesperson you're talking to is taking notes on everything that you're saying. So when you call them in 6 months, they kind of forgot about you, and you say, hey, how's your husband doing? Last time we talked, he just got out of the hospital, yada, yada, yada. And people really appreciate that you remember stuff about that. So in between calls 1 and 2, that's where we're going to do a little bit of due diligence. I'll comp the property. We'll determine what the ARV is. Based on what they told me about rehab, we'll estimate rehab, and then we'll back into our offer that way. That's a topic for a whole nother video, is just like, I guess, getting the offer together and comping and all the numbers side of things. But that's when I would be doing this. So on call number 2, I'll call them back as soon as I can. Usually people really appreciate it if you can call them back within like 5 or 10 minutes if you're fairly proficient at running numbers on your end. Comp the property, estimate rehab, get your offer together, and call them right back. And they'll be impressed by like, oh wow, that was fast, and I don't have to wait 2 days to hear what these people can pay for my house. Call them right back, and then I'll make them a range offer. I won't say, we can pay $205,000 for it. If 205 was the number that we would want the deal at, I would usually low anchor them like 10,000 less than that, so 195 to 5,000 more than that to 210. Somewhere like a 10 to 15,000 range offer is what I make. That's pretty acceptable to the seller because you haven't actually seen the property. You're just going based on what they told you on the first call, and I'll tell them that. It's like, okay, I ran some numbers, I did some digging on our resale here. Based on what you told me over that first call about condition, we would be somewhere in the 195 to 210 range for this one. And then just let them talk after that. Just make the offer, and that's it. You don't really want to over explain it at this point. Just see what they say. If they don't 100% scoff at that, depends on your market, I guess, on how hot it is and how retail oriented your market is. But if they don't scoff at that, just book the appointment right there that day or the next day as soon as you can get out there, because that's like a pretty hot lead at that point. If they're like, oh man, that's never going to work, then if they didn't reveal their price on the first call, this is the point where they will reveal their price because they had thought about it even though they told you they didn't. They'd be like, oh, I can't walk with less than 300 for this. And obviously we're way off on price if the max we could pay was 210 and they're at 300. Especially if you're new, again, I would just take the appointment anyway because it's good practice to go see the real estate that you're studying and looking at and talking to sellers and all that stuff. So even at that, and depending on how hot the market is and how hard it is to get deals, I'd book the appointment anyway and just say, okay, yeah, well, I don't know if we'll be able to pay 300, but I'd love to come take a look at it. The only way that offer is going to come up is if our rehab costs are less. And if our rehab costs are less, I'm happy to pay you more for it. So just, keep them talking, keep Don't be disrespectful. They might be offended by your offer. You just be as nice as possible. Keep the relationship open. Keep the possibility of a deal down the road open, and just try to book the appointment as much as you can. So to recap, that second call, range offer, book the appointment. That's all. Those are the two goals for that call. So step 3 is actually on the appointment. This is the other time that you're going to have to talk to the seller. For me, I don't typically like talking on the phone. I'm pretty reserved, pretty shy. I would much rather talk to someone one-on-one in person. For whatever reason, it's just way easier for me to talk to them and build a relationship that way versus over the phone. So I like taking appointments and doing that instead of the phone stuff. At the appointment, the first and foremost goal here is just to build more rapport and get that relationship sewn a little bit deeper. Like I said, that's much easier for me to do in person. Some people might be the other way around where they're better on the phone than in person, but either way, it's nice to just make face-to-face contact with people. You take yourself from being just a voice on the phone to now a face to the person, and then you can recap what they told you on the phone. If there's any personal stuff that they told you, you start talking about that. When I'm going through the house, especially if it's their house, it's not like a rental or anything that you see around, you just start talking about that. And people love to talk about shit that they like, sports teams, politics, anything like that. So anything that you can relate to without totally lying to the seller. I remember on one appointment, I saw some mail sitting on the table that was like Joe Biden donor. So obviously this seller is like a Democrat. He donates to Joe Biden. And I didn't bring it up at that time, but of course politics got brought up somehow. And the dude starts going off on Trump. This was before Biden got elected. It was right before the election. He starts going off. And you just let him talk and you kind of agree. And you're just like, yeah, Trump says some crazy shit, doesn't he? And that just makes it like you're on their side without lying to them, I guess. He says some crazy shit. The other way around too, if that guy had a Trump donor thing, I could bring up, oh yeah, I'm from Gardnerville, that place is Trump town, yada, yada, yada. You don't have to totally get into your political beliefs, but just making small talk and conversation like that goes a long way when you're there to look at the house, but the conversation can go any which way on talking about other stuff besides the actual real estate. When we're on the appointment, we also want to take as many photos as possible and probably a walkthrough video too. So this can be done kind of simultaneously while you're talking to the seller. Again, people are different. Some people will show you the entire house and they'll be 2 feet away from you the entire time. Other people they'll open the door and be like, yeah, this is it. Let me know when you're done. That type of stuff. So those people are a little bit harder to talk to. We can bullshit with the people and build rapport at the same time that we're walking through the house, especially if you're a little bit more experienced and you kind of know what you're looking for. Whether you're flipping or wholesaling, we need to have a bunch of photos just to reference later, especially if you're wholesaling, because you're going to be blasting this deal out to your buyer's list or bringing it to an individual buyer. There's nothing worse than getting a deal through your email that has 3 photos and I guess we'd be in this range, but we can't even see the condition of the home. So just get as many photos as you can while you're out there. And videos sometimes capture stuff that photos does not, like a funky floor plan or maybe some repairs that you missed in the photo. I would take between 75 and 100 photos, just a couple of each room. We're looking for major system stuff. We're looking for cosmetic stuff, any obvious defects that you see, any water damage that you see, ceiling or floor in the bathrooms, anything like that, we're getting a photo of it so we can get a really, really good idea later on when we're not at the appointment what rehab is going to be. So after we're done kind of bullshitting with the seller and getting all the photos and really checking out the house, now I'm going to rerun my numbers at the appointment. So I'll bring my iPad, we have our spreadsheet in there, and then usually if you get the person to talk enough on the first call, your rehab number probably won't be much different than it was before you took the appointment. Sometimes the seller's totally dishonest on the condition of their property, and all they'll give you is that, yeah, it needs some flooring and paint and this and that, and you think it's in great shape. They say all this stuff, and you get out there and it's a total disaster. So you need to adjust your rehab number accordingly. We don't need to be exact right here. We just need to be kind of in the ballpark range of rehab. We need to know the difference between a $20,000 rehab and a $70,000 rehab, because that could be deal or no deal whether you're flipping or wholesaling. I'll punch it in the iPad, I'll rerun the numbers, and then I'll make them a more firm offer right there. I'm done with the range offer at this point. It's like, yeah, Okay, rehab was a little bit heavier than I thought. This is kind of what we're going to do to it. Depends on the seller. Some people appreciate you going through the numbers with it or your rehab plan. Some people don't care at all. But either way, we're going to give them an offer right there. And the goal is to get the contract. So once you make the offer, this is where you're going to get most of your objections from the seller. Usually it's always that rehab cost is too high, offer price is too low. That's basically it. Like, there's other things here. They'll ask you about the process of the transaction. So it's good to educate yourself if you don't know on that, as far as how escrow works, which title company you're using, realistic timelines. We'll get into that in a bit, that type of stuff. At this point, it's your job as the acquisitions guy to politely tell the seller why they're wrong and educate the seller on why your numbers are where you're at. Like I said, that doesn't mean that you have to go line by line on your rehab. It does mean that if they want full retail for the property, you can now explain to them why that's not possible with you as a buyer. And this is where it gets kind of dicey into misrepresenting to the seller, because I don't want to say, oh, you're never going to get that for it. Who knows? Someone out there might pay them that. I don't know, but that's not what we can pay for it. So we're just thinking about what I can pay for it, what the company can pay for it, what your buyers can pay for it. I'll go through, like, if they give me, say a $400,000 price, and I think that, we'll sell it for that amount, I'll tell them, you kind of play their side at first. It's like, I can see where you got that. Like, I saw this comp, this comp, this comp. You can pull out addresses for comps. That, again, that shows more confidence in the seller that you know what you're talking about. You're not just guessing. It's like, yeah, I saw the neighbor's house that you're talking about. It's over here, 123 Main Street, right? Yeah. Okay, so that one sold for $400,000, but it was completely remodeled. Like, that's a great comp for us. That's exactly what we're gonna sell this place for when we're done with it. That being said, it's gonna take $70,000 worth of work to get it there, and then you kind of walk them through the numbers that way. Usually they'll be more understanding. That doesn't mean it's gonna be a deal, and they'll just say, oh yeah, you're right, that's fine. That will educate them on why they're not gonna get $400,000 for their property as is, and why your offer is actually like $285,000. Sometimes you can get more in detail with the numbers. We have this cost, this cost, this cost. We have to make a 10% profit, or our investors just won't fund the deal, and that's why we're at $285,000. However you want to phrase it, this is a great time to educate the seller. And now remember, we've already done call number 1, where you should have been building rapport. Call number 2, where you should have been building rapport. Step number 3, with the appointment, where you definitely should have been building the most rapport. And now we're at the point where we're going to be handling objections. So you can see how that's a much different scenario now than on that first call, when you're just like, we'll give you $285,000 for it, and they're like, fuck you, and hang up. Now you're a real person, you know all about their situation, they know about you, and now we're at $285,000 because of this. Much different situation. So those are the 3 steps to talking to sellers and getting a contract that we use here at the company. There are 2 additional steps that I'd like to go through real quick, depending on what happens at the appointment. So step number 1 or 4, depending on how you're looking at it, is follow up. And that's if we don't get the contract. Pretty often, especially with how the market is, and people are just unrealistic on what they're going to get. No matter what the market is, just depends on the person. If they're stuck on that 400 number and you're at 285, it's going to be no deal at the appointment. That's fine. Be nice to them, be respectful. You may have offended them. If you're good at talking to people and building that relationship, they shouldn't be mad at you. Later on, we're gonna follow up with these people to check in. So we always wanna stay in rapport and stay polite and nice to people for this reason. That's not the last time we're gonna talk to them, and hopefully not the last time that we're gonna see them. Almost always, people are talking to other buyers, not just you. And if they are just talking to you, now they're discouraged and they don't wanna sell. Like, situations change, things happen, they talk to other people, whatever. So we're gonna follow up forever until they sell the property, basically. So depending on what happens, if they've got a bunch of buyers coming through and you're competing for the deal, you might lose it. They might have told you at the appointment, oh, we already got an offer for X amount from this person. Cool, that's another objection that you can figure out how to handle. But we're gonna keep following up, and we can check the public record every couple weeks to see if the property's sold, and then that gives you your in for calling them back. And you can say, hey, this is Alex, I was out there at the house, just wanted to check in. I saw that it hasn't sold yet. Like, are you still selling it? Are you still interested? What's going on? And just get another conversation going. So you can see why it's important for them to like you throughout the process, because if they now hate you and you were mean to them or you didn't do a good job, explaining why your offer is where it is, there's going to be no deal ever because they just don't like you as a person. So now I can call them back and just check in. You know, it's not a big high pressure call for either party. It's just like, what's going on? I see that it hasn't sold. And they'll tell you, oh, I decided to take it off the market. We're not selling. Oh, so-and-so says they're going to buy it, yada, yada, yada. So just keep following up until you either get the contract or someone else buys it. And it's pretty often that we get deals months down the road from that initial call or from the appointment just by following up. So this step is super important if you don't get the contract on that appointment. One that we're about to buy tomorrow, same situation, called them, went through this process, called them back, made them an offer. It was way lower than their price expectations were way out of line. They wanted like $500,000 as is. That's the after repair value, and it needs $70,000 worth of work. Based on what they told me on the phone, I thought it was like $40,000. I offered them $350,000. They were way off. They called me back, happened to be on the same day that I had a task to call them back to follow up. Okay, so someone offered me $350,000. Like, where are you guys at? And I go in my notes. I'm like, yeah, that was me. I offered you $350,000. Oh, okay. Well, someone else offered us $350,000 too. Who knows if that was true? I don't know. Then it's like, okay, cool. Well, yeah, let me come take a look at it. That's booked the appointment right there. And so I went out there the next day. Place was a wreck, heavier than I thought it was going to be. Offered him $335,000. Went through the process again. Oh no, that's way too low. So-and-so is going to pay $350,000 for it. Okay, well, you know, this is where we're at. I left him a contract to prove that we're serious. And of course, that person did not perform. And we ended up getting the contract a week after that for $340,000, like pretty close to that offer where I wanted at the appointment. So it just goes to show you that follow-up is super important. Staying in rapport with people is super important because you can get deals way later down the road. The other point I wanted to go over, if we did get the contract at the appointment, do not think that it's a done deal, especially if you're new. A huge mistake by newbies is like getting a contract and now everything's gravy and you start counting the money that you don't have yet. We need to be following up throughout the escrow process with all parties involved. Like when I buy something, I'm following up with title and the seller all the way through the transaction until we are on record and we own the property. If you're wholesaling a deal, I'm following up with title, seller, and the buyer. And we basically need to play coordinator for the transaction to move from contract to close. You are the point of contact. Even if you're not buying the property and you're wholesaling it, you are still the point of contact for the seller because they might think that you're buying it or your partner's buying it or what have you. They've never really met the other buyer. So if they have any questions, they're calling you. If anything goes wrong, they're calling you. If anything goes wrong with your buyer or title, you're calling them. So again, throughout the escrow process, if you did get the contract, super important to stay in rapport, and really people just appreciate good communication. I think especially if you do a lot of deals, like it's not a big deal to you anymore to like buy a house or anything. It's a really big deal for most people to buy or sell a house. So people appreciate good communication throughout the process, not just like sign the contract and they don't hear from you until title calls to schedule a signing appointment. They don't even know what's going on. So I'll try to keep people updated as we can. You know, if we have other inspections to do, I'm the one coordinating that. I'll let them know when we opened up escrow. I'll give them an escrow number. I'll give them the escrow agent's contact information. Even if they don't use it, this is just stuff that people appreciate. And it makes you seem more legitimate as well versus just ghosting them right after you get the contract. Another big one throughout the escrow process is just managing timelines and expectations. This is a mistake that I made at the beginning. You know, the wholesale gurus always teach you like, we're gonna close in 7 days and all this shit. It's possible, but like, unless a buyer has a huge amount of cash and a team that really knows what they're doing and they can get and title that really knows what they're doing. So title, the buyer's funds, and the buyer's inspections all can be done in 7 days. Yes, it can be done, but like that's not very common to close in 7 days, and really hardly any sellers need to close in 7 days. So if you're using private lending or hard money or what have you, like 14 days is doable. 21 days is almost always doable. So I just set that expectation from the beginning with the seller, and I'll just set the closing date unless they have a weird situation where they want to close farther out, or they need a rent back, or they need to close like ASAP, hardly ever, but if they need to, I will just, instead of when do you want to close, it's like, we're going to close on this date, on or before this date. How's that sound? And almost always they're like, yeah, that's cool. And if they give you some grief for that, it's like, oh, well, it takes time for title to process the paperwork and this and that. So like, let's just keep it at that date. And they're almost always like, okay. That's kind of a point to make at the appointment when you're getting the contract, is to not shoot yourself in the foot by promising to close too soon, because later on when you're managing these timelines, it's much easier to close on time when you give yourself some time to close. As far as, something might come up with title and there's a title issue. Lending always takes a little bit. Inspections sometimes, depending on the property, if it's on well or septic, you might call your well guy and he's 7 days out, and it's like, well, we're supposed to close a day before you can even get out there. And then you have to call the seller and explain why you need to extend, and then they're pissed because you set unrealistic expectations from the front. It's not worth it. Easier just to say we're going to close in 21 days and give yourself some time to do that. And just to reiterate, not to celebrate too soon. It seems like things always happen right before closing. So just be on top of your transaction all the way through closing. And that's with all parties involved, not just the seller. You might have to take the extra step and tell title to set the signing appointment because maybe they're not on the ball with the seller. Tell the seller, yes, title will be reaching out to you to set the signing appointment. Just keep everyone like in the loop on what's going on, and just clear communication with the seller and all parties involved, and you'll make your life a lot easier. So that about wraps it up for our process on talking to sellers, and a couple of tips and tricks that I use for talking to sellers at various stages of the relationship. If you like that, please hit the like button for us. Please hit subscribe if you're new here. Stay up to date with all the content that we're dropping on every project that we do, plus all these question of the week episodes. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode.